You walk into a room and something shifts inside you before a single word is spoken. No one raised their voice, no alarm went off, but your brain has already finished its scan. An avoided glance, a smile that arrived half a second too late, a sentence that sounded completely normal but carried a weight underneath that no one else seemed to notice. Most people call this a gift, a superpower. But the people who actually live inside it know the truth. It is exhausting, it is relentless, and it never turns off. There is a certain kind of person who cannot simply be in a moment. They have to understand it, dissect it, file it away. They take a single pause in a conversation home with them, turn it over for hours, and build an entire architecture of meaning around it. And if you know someone like this, or if you are someone like this, you already know it is not always a superpower. Sometimes it feels more like a sentence. Here is what most people get wrong about this. It is not overthinking. It is not simple anxiety. And it is absolutely not a personality flaw. What is happening inside the minds of people who are too aware is something far more sophisticated. Something that once you understand it clearly, the way you see yourself will never be quite the same. So where does this level of awareness come from? Psychologists trace it back to two very different origins. The first group was simply born this way. Researchers call them highly sensitive persons, HSPs. They carry a trait known as sensory processing sensitivity. Their nervous system, from the very beginning, functions like a precision instrument. Where most people perceive the world through a standard lens, they perceive it in ultra-high definition. Every emotional undercurrent, every micro-expression, lands with more intensity. It is not a choice. It is the baseline they arrived with. But here is where it gets interesting. The second group did not start out this way. Their awareness was not born, it was built. Neuroscience calls this hypervigilance, and it almost always traces back to an emotionally unpredictable environment, most often in childhood. Picture a child growing up in a house where the atmosphere could shift without warning, where the sound of a car pulling into the driveway carried meaning, where a cabinet door slamming told them everything they needed to know about the next few hours. That child could not afford innocence. They had to become a radar system just to stay safe. Their amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, ran on a permanent loop, and the pattern that protected them then followed them straight into adulthood. That child became an adult who still scans every room before relaxing, who still listens for the tone underneath the words, who looks back at themselves and wonders what is wrong with them, why they cannot just let things go. But nothing is wrong with them. They built a form of intelligence forged by necessity. The shield worked. They survived. The problem is, the shield never learned to come off. So what does that look like in daily life? The most visible sign is living in constant analysis mode. For most people, a conversation is just a conversation. For someone who is too aware, every interaction runs a hidden equation in the background. Their boss sends a message at 4 in the afternoon. 5 words. Can you stop by later? For the average person, that is a scheduling note. For them, it is a puzzle. Something in the phrasing felt slightly off. A coolness in the word choice. By the time the actual meeting happens, they have already lived through a dozen versions of it. This connects directly to the default mode network, the brain system responsible for self-referential thinking. In most people, this network quiets during active tasks. In people who are hyper-aware, it stays on. One half of them is sitting in the meeting, nodding, participating in the world. The other half is taking notes, filing observations, running comparisons. And by the end of a completely ordinary day, they are exhausted in a way that is almost impossible to explain to someone who does not live it. That constant outward analysis eventually turns inward. Psychology calls the ability to observe your own thinking metacognition. Everyone has it to some degree, but for people who are too aware, the switch has no off position. They do not just feel emotions, they audit them. They feel sad on a Tuesday afternoon for no clear reason. Instead of simply sitting with that, the interrogation begins. Why am I sad? Is this even proportionate? I have every reason to be grateful. Even joy gets pulled apart. They laugh at something, and within the same breath, part of their mind is watching that laugh from the outside, evaluating whether it sounded genuine. It is like trying to dance while analyzing your own posture in a mirror. They may execute every step correctly, but the flow is gone, and that loss of flow seeps into every relationship. Because when you see as clearly as they do, you cannot unsee things. Psychology calls this advanced theory of mind, the ability to model other people's internal states. A colleague brings them coffee and says something kind. Instead of simply receiving it, their brain runs a parallel track. What does this person need from me? Is this kindness real or is it strategy? They have seen too many times that affection can be a transaction. That confidence is sometimes just fear wearing a better outfit. The result is a quiet grief, not bitterness, just a slow erosion of the ability to take things at face value. They feel lonely in crowds because they are perceiving a layer of reality that no one else in the room seems to acknowledge. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room full of people who seemed completely fine and immediately felt something heavy you could not name? That is not textbook anxiety. That is empathy with no off switch. For people who are too aware, empathy is not a skill they deploy. It is a permanent state. Someone sits next to them on the train, leg bouncing with nervous energy, and their own chest tightens in response. A friend calls to talk about something painful, and the residue of that call stays in their body for days. Neuroscience connects this to mirror neuron systems, the neural networks that activate when we observe another person's experience, as if we ourselves are having it. For people who are hyper-aware, this creates absorption. They become the emotional regulator in every room they enter. People gravitate toward them because they feel understood. But the price is invisible. They carry weight that was never theirs to begin with. And almost no one thinks to ask how they are doing. But here is what nobody tells you. All of that absorbed emotion has somewhere to go. And it almost always goes straight into the body. Science calls this interoception. The brain's ability to read the body's internal signals, processed through a region called the insular cortex. In people who are too aware, this system is acutely sensitive. A cup of strong coffee raises their heart rate slightly. For most people, that feels like alertness. For their nervous system, the brain detects the shift, cross-references it against stored threat data, and sounds an alarm. Cortisol releases. The heart rate climbs further. And now a simple afternoon espresso has triggered a physical loop that feels like something is genuinely wrong. Normal sensations become warnings, and the pattern becomes a baseline hum of unease that follows them everywhere, even into moments when nothing bad is actually happening. And it goes even deeper than that. Because when the body will not quiet and the emotions will not stop arriving, the mind reaches for the only tool that has ever made it feel safe: control. Not control over others, something quieter. A belief, mostly unconscious, that if they can think through every possible outcome in advance, they will never be caught off guard by pain. So they run simulations, constantly, quietly, in the background of everything. What if this falls apart? What if they pull away? What if everything disappears and they were not prepared? Psychologists call this analysis paralysis, living inside 10 possible futures simultaneously while the actual present moment passes by unexamined. In trying to protect themselves from pain, they step slightly outside of their own life. None of this is permanent, and none of it means something is broken. The solution is not to become less aware. That would be like asking someone with exceptional vision to blur their own sight. The awareness is not the problem, the weight of it is. The shift begins with one reorientation. Noticing something is not the same as being responsible for it. Not every silence is a coded message. Not every shifted expression means something aimed at them. They can observe without absorbing. They can understand without carrying. They can see clearly and still choose to set the equation down. People who find their way through this anchor themselves in the present, not through forced positivity or willful ignorance, but through genuine self-permission. They begin to realize that awareness, when paired with boundaries, transforms into something extraordinary. It becomes wisdom rather than a burden. They still read rooms, they still notice what others miss, but they no longer feel obligated to hold all of it. The sharp laser slowly softens into something warmer, still precise, but no longer burning through everything it touches. These are the people who think in layers, who feel in depths, who carry an intelligence that was either given to them at birth or forged through years of learning to survive. If you see yourself somewhere in this, the depth you carry is not a design flaw. It is not something to fix or silence. It is something to understand. And understanding it even slightly more than you did 10 minutes ago is already the beginning of something lighter. If this resonated with you, I would really appreciate you subscribing. There is more to explore about how your mind works. I will see you in the next one.